Click record. Okay, we're ready to go. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Bristol. I'd like to welcome you to the Smart Way webinar series for nonprofit professionals. I'm president of Bristol Strategy Group, and our focus is on ways to manage fundraising efforts so that you can achieve greater mission impact. This series is based on Fundraising the Smart Way, our trademark methodology and a highly innovative approach to improving the productivity of your fundraising efforts. In this session, I'll discuss how small fundraising shops can thrive like the big shops do by improving the way they manage their fundraising efforts. If you've attended before, you know that Smart Way webinars are always short. We try to keep them under half an hour, and we concentrate each one on some management practices that will help you work smarter and hopefully not harder. Just a little housekeeping. You're all muted. If you have a question, you may post it on Q&A. Q&A button is you can see it when you hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I'll give you a few minutes after we're done here to ask additional questions. So if everybody's ready, let's jump right ahead. She said, there we go. So you'll know that big fundraising shops kind of look like this. At least they should look like this. Big organizations have the luxury of a dedicated team of people. In the biggest shops, they may have hundreds of people. That's the Harvards and the Mormon churches, with literally hundreds of gift officers, event managers, social media experts, data analysts, prospect researchers, and all those yummy things that make it possible for those organizations to earn hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars a year. Those organizations are very few in number. They're probably not even 5% of all nonprofits. But they have all this luxury, ... assuming they manage those huge teams well. On the other hand, if you're running a small shop, your shop probably looks and feels like this. One or maybe zero little overburdened person who's doing, wearing 9 hats and working 27 hours a day plus twice on Sundays. A huge number of shops really have a huge number of nonprofits, really have no fundraising shop at all. But a surprising number of those shop-less organizations have learned how to raise money predictably and consistently, which is the watchword around here, because they've mastered how you manage and how you provide tools to volunteers. The truism I'd like to share with you is this: great management practices, which we'll be talking about in today's session, genuinely provide more capacity to raise money than nonprofits with an all-volunteer army without such great management practices. The great management practices really make it easier, not only easier to raise the money, but easier to recruit and engage committed volunteers who are super enthusiastic. I wish I had had the presence of mind to prepare a poll, which I did not, but I'd kind of like to ask you, and you can reply on Q&A, how many of you have asked your board to raise money for you and gotten very little back? My experience is that's more common than otherwise. So quick, send me a message. Let's see, one person's replied. Leslie says it happens every year. She asks the board to do something, or he asks the board to do something, and they never do it. So that's my experience. I bet a lot of you have had that experience. So how do we get around this? Well, what we're going to talk about here kind of has a lot to do with the way you think, the way you collaborate, and the big decisions you make before you even start any activities to raise money. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is really most important. When we're thinking about fundraising, we have to go back to prioritize. In the list you're seeing here, there is a combination of very high-level challenges, usually the mission-related challenges like eliminate social programs or wipe out hunger and disease. But like I've said in a few other Smart Way webinars, some challenges that really are a thorn in your side might not be as important. Like, should we pay the funder a salary? Well, I mean the founder, pardon me, especially if the founder is still on board and an active leader. Well, duh, yeah. But is that as important as other elements on this list to the achievement, to the impact your organization wants to make? There's a great book about this called The One Thing. The guy who wrote that book, I'd recommend you look it up, The One Thing. The guy who wrote that book says, you can't focus on a lot of stuff. Focus on the one thing that's most important. So that one thing has to be a priority at the moment. Something we've learned over our nearly 25 years in the consulting business is that few teams, few organizations really know how to set priorities. And I'm guilty of this myself. If I wake up in the morning and I say, oh, I've got 50 zillion things to do, like every day, and I want to prioritize those things, my typical fallback is what seems most important to me at the moment. And I learned over time, it's kind of a lousy way to do it. So there are techniques, some of which you've heard of, like brainstorming and maybe multi-voting, and others like the affinity diagram, the forced choice matrix, the decision matrix. These are fantastic tools to understand for setting priorities. And believe it or not, there are rules to brainstorming. I put an asterisk in here because along with a co-author, we just now published a book days ago on strategic planning. It's right here, Success Planning for Nonprofits. If you really want to see all the tools for prioritization and decision making, you can download this book from Amazon. It's about $15 or get it in hard copy and check out all of these tools in the toolkit. Or just look up just Google techniques for setting priorities. Do your priority setting in a group, you and a few members of your board, or program chairs, or whatever program managers, whatever team you can put together. So you're not just pulling an idea out of your head. But if you're going to choose your one thing, in almost every instance in a nonprofit, it's achieving mission impact. It's something to do with your mission. Now, the one thing may change from time to time. Maybe today it's attracting more people to follow you and your mission. And maybe tomorrow or next 6 months from now, it's serving more clients to demonstrate mission impact. But I assure you that you have to have great clarity on the most important thing for your nonprofit to focus on in order to figure out how to manage your fundraising. So let's move along. Once you know what it is that you want to focus on, that's your one thing, something related to your mission. These are the 4 critical targets that have to be established and documented. You have to decide how much income you're going to need to operate and to achieve your mission. We've often spoken about the overhead myth. We need to make sure there's enough money to pay the rent, keep the lights on, keep the technology operating, and pay at least one person to do the work, right? To run the show. Then 3 other critical elements are, of our current funders, assuming we have any, how many of them can we retain for another gift in the coming year? If they're individual donors, there's techniques to make sure they give again. If they're grants, you have to know which grants are going to expire, which are not going to expire, and which ones you can renew if they do expire. And finally, based on, by the way, retention also includes how much money you'll get from those retained donors. So there's a number here, how much income, 2 numbers here, current funders and amount of money desired from current funders. Then there's a target for new funders to acquire and upgrade from whatever giving level to the next giving level. So that's number of funders and a desired amount of income from funders. And then who's going to do the work? Fundraising is full of labor-intensive tasks. So we know that if this is a one-person shop or an all-volunteer shop, nobody's going to be able to be entirely responsible for fundraising. They're going to do it as a part-time job. So this question again raises a number of targets. What characteristics does a volunteer fundraiser have to demonstrate? And believe me, as Leslie just said, it isn't going to be just ask the board to do it. It's going to be a few members on the board will demonstrate the right motivations. And maybe there are other volunteer leaders we can identify out there in the world. Now, I said a moment ago, who's going to do the work? Well, the first part of the work that has to be done is to analyze what we were just talking about. How big is your base of funders? How many are in a position to give again? How, blah, 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 what we just said. This is a one-person job. And you really need to do it at least, you need to do it once. before you put any of the other recommendations that I'll share in place. You should repeat such an analysis regularly, once a year, once every 6 months. But to get started, this is a one-person, one-time job. Now establish your SMART targets. If you've ever done or read about strategic planning, you're probably aware that SMART is an acronym. We use it in Fundraising the Smart Way. It has a slightly different meaning, but the standard meaning is the acronym stands for the target has to be specific. For example, dollars or numbers. It has to be measurable. Well, dollars and numbers are easy to measure. It has to be assignable. In other words, somebody has to be assigned or be held accountable for getting the job done. It has to be realistic. If you're currently raising $17,492 a year, don't set a $250,000 target for next year. It's not likely to happen. Although, God willing, I hope it does. And finally, they have to be time defined. By when is the best time definition? This fiscal year, this calendar, 18 months from now. We're going to have this specific measurable thing assigned to Mary or Jack, and it's going to be realistic in terms of our capacity. So that's a big help. Believe me, it's a super big help. This slide has the most tools in it that'll help your team. And we're going to get to who can be on your team at the end of this part of the slide. Because if you can't give these things to your volunteer leader team, they don't have anything that they can use. They don't know what to talk about. They don't know who to talk to, and they don't have a process to follow. So before you start fundraising, look at the top orange bar here, which I described as Smart Way components. Fundraising the Smart Way is really super about helping you craft these components. You can do some of it yourself, even if you don't implement Fundraising the Smart Way. Want more guidance? Buy the book. So first thing is the ideal donor profile. You have no idea how valuable this is. An ideal donor profile says, it is a list, and it says, try to find out if the next person you speak to shares the motivations that complement what we're trying to achieve. You know, if our job is to wipe out hunger, your donors better be interested in wiping out world hunger or hunger in your neighborhood. They also have to have a certain level of giving capacity and track record. And it's nice to know when you've run into an obstacle or an objection that you can't overcome. So those three components, what motivates them to give, what's their capacity and track record for giving, and whether or not they have other characteristics that make them an undesirable candidate, like big talk, no action, or I can't get to the decision maker. Those are super valuable. If you give your volunteer leaders a scorecard or a checklist that says, look for people with these characteristics, fantastic. The next session are other necessary tools. It's extremely beneficial for you guys to set up what are called giving levels. I'm not talking about the precious metals list. I'm talking about what does a gift of $5 achieve for you? What about a $25 gift, a $100 gift, a $500 gift? we have a client in West Africa, I'm going to make another reference to them later, where lots of people are poor and they don't have the culture of voluntary fundraising that we do in this country. So they're going to start small. This organization provides scholarships for students to attend high school, which is not free in that country. So their giving levels start at $5, and they say $5 is enough to buy a student a geometry kit, you know, the compass and angles and all that stuff. And $15 is enough to buy a pocket calculator, and they go up from there. So, I'm sorry. Ooh, I really went far away. Having giving levels that people can relate to. You don't need 90 giving levels. 3, 4, 5 giving levels are fine. Giving level 1 supports this amount. Giving level 2, that amount. Giving level 3, such and such an amount. And you can use those giving levels in your online giving page, but you also hand them out to your volunteers. Say, this is a way to start. The second thing you need to have and give to your volunteers is what I'm referring here to here as a pitch deck. You might think of it as a case for support. However you put it together, it's the talking points that allow your volunteer fundraising team to talk about the value your nonprofit brings to society and why supporting them is a good idea. That's why we call it the case for support. You can also provide a process for evangelizing. Maybe some of the people on your team are highly social, or they belong to a business organization like a chamber of commerce or a Rotary Club. Equip those folks with the tools to evangelize. They may even ask for 5 or 10 minutes on the agenda to talk about your nonprofit and the valuable work you're doing. And the final and incredibly powerful tool is setting up a stewardship process. I'm going to talk about details regarding stewardship in a moment. Now, the most, to put all these ideas into action, having done the preliminary foundational work, you've established your targets, you've analyzed who's in your donor base, you've figured out how much money you need, and so on and so forth. Now we've got to find people who are willing to serve as fundraising volunteers. They may serve on your board, but don't ever anticipate that all board members are willing, interested, or able to raise money for you. And don't force them. I've got other roles for the board to play in the fundraising effort. There are other advocates you can find. Some of them may be past clients who have achieved whatever success, however you measure success. Some of them may be current donors. Scrutinize especially if you have individual donors. If you have any individual donors who have given at what you consider a higher level, and they're showing, they call you up, they visit, they make referrals, why not have a conversation with people who are also showing a higher level of engagement and see how interested they will be You know, I forgot a critical tool that I can share with you guys. It's part of the pitch deck. It's a questioning, a way to ask questions. And I'll make sure that you know to look up this particular white paper. We have a white paper on called 3 Simple Questions That Get Donors to Give. Check that one out. It's on our Smart Practices resource library, and it's a free download. Back to finding your volunteer leaders. So any other advocates in the community, be it a geographic community or the community of interest, it sort of doesn't matter. If you have as few as 2 or 3 people to populate your volunteer leadership team, 1 person, start with that small team. It's more than you have now. Hope this is making sense. Now, how do you leverage your volunteers? First of all, you hold high standards for who's qualified to becoming a volunteer. Most of us who volunteer in any way in the nonprofit sector will say yes very often, even when they don't really mean it. You know, the enthusiasm of the moment can persuade people to say yes prematurely. So you've got to make sure that you're being selective. You have to, you know, if you're talking to somebody, you really have to say to them, I'd love to have you volunteer, but this is going to require a lot of attention and you have to be consistent. So you tell me how passionate you are about doing this work for us on a volunteer basis, because only the passionate need apply. Then you start them on stewardship. Stewardship is a great role for board members, all board members, and a super duper role for volunteers, because stewardship has nothing to do with asking. The standard stewardship model we like to recommend is you have this. Every donor, no matter how small, no matter whether it's a corporate donation, a grant, or an individual gift of 79 cents at an event, entitles those people to a phone call once a year from a volunteer or a board member whose job is to say, thanks so much. As a result of your gift, we've been able to accomplish the following. Kisses and hugs, goodbye. And by the way, that always starts with, this is Ellen. I serve on the board of the Institute for the Bewildered. And I wanted to thank you for your gift. Now, another step is teach them how to evangelize. Maybe some of those people love to speak in public. Make sure they have a pitch deck, a slide deck, or some talking points so they can give those little 5-minute or 10-minute pitches. You can also ask your volunteers to follow up on people who attend your events, whether they're fundraising events, friend-raising events, community meetings, whatever. Make sure you've provided your volunteer leaders with the targets and the tools or aids to fundraising that we've talked about in this presentation. And here's one of the most important things. Gather your volunteers on a regular basis to review their progress against the plan they helped put together. A super way to do this is by conference call or a virtual meeting by using Zoom or Google Hangouts or Skype, whatever doesn't require people to get on a plane or drive across town at rush hour. The critical thing about listen, nothing happens unless somebody's managing what happens. So let's talk about managing your volunteer leaders, which is harder to do in some ways than managing your employees, because you can hold your employees accountable in a more forceful way than you can hold your volunteers. So when you're choosing your performance targets, re-choose them with your volunteer team in an inclusive way. You've got your 3 or 4 people on your conference call, and you say, as our organization has a target of reaching whatever, $100,000 this year, $1, whatever it is. How do you think we can work together to make this happen? So and then you go on to say, let's talk about how many people on our current donor base we can get to retain, how many new ones we can get, how many upgrades we can get, whatever it is. Then during your team reviews, do not say, Mary, what have you done? Jack, what have you done? Gather that data ahead of time and say, team, here's what we've done so far. Here's what we're doing well. Here's where we seem to be stalled. Now, how can we do better in the next cycle? So it's always engaging all of your participants, sharing praise and encouragement, using data to find out where you're running into bottlenecks and obstacles to success, not how come you didn't do your work, you bad person. Share reports, on this stuff. And I'll tell you the 2 goat story really quickly because we are running a little over time. Our client in Africa have a lot of alumni, and a portion of those alums are employed, and half of those who are employed are self-employed, they're entrepreneurs. So they had the idea of recruiting their volunteer leaders from amongst their alumni, who are for the most part young adults. They're graduated from high school within the past 4 or 5 years, 7 years maybe. And the country director said, we'll take you guys camping and talk about how you can become involved in a new and different way. And if you agree, I'll buy us a goat. With the idea that they would slaughter the goat and roast the goat, which is not something you and I would do at a picnic in the US. They all showed up. He bought them 2 goats. Praise and encouragement. Now, when you're managing your fundraising, always read the story the data tell you. How many of the people we're meeting with or interacting with match our ideal donor profile? Are we or are we not achieving our desired results? And make sure that you measure results not only by the number and dollar value of gifts you receive, but also by how many people agree to meet with you and agree to accept or to consider making a gift. Those are called early indicators or leading indicators. And as you're looking at those data, the team needs to agree on what the challenges are. And then they need to collaborate on what to improve and how to improve. And a critical point for all of you folks out there is the minute a volunteer leader says, I've got an idea, let's do a bachelor auction, cow race, a golf tournament, discourage them kindly but firmly. If you're already committed to 1 or 2 events a year, that's all you can manage. Unless a member of your team wants to do a peer fundraising event and do all the work, pay all the costs, and deliver nothing but results to you. So fundraising should be very light on events. Well, we've run 5 minutes over. I really appreciate your involvement and your commitment, and we're so happy so many of you have come to attend these webinars repeatedly. So after we're done, you all, including those who registered and didn't attend, you're going to get an email with live links to everything that you see here, our website, information about our methodology, a way to buy the book, and you can schedule a call. We're also going to invite you to complete the leaky bucket assessment if you haven't done so yet. Now, quick before we go, does anybody have additional questions that I haven't answered yet? You can put those questions up or email me with questions, and I'll make sure everybody sees the answers to those questions. I don't want to take too much of your time because people are already signing off, but I don't see any additional questions. So I'm going to say thank you very much. Come to our next meeting, which is in December, and have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. Bye for now.